I want to tell you about a woman named Ruth because I still think about what she said to me almost every week. I met her at a boat launch on a lake in Michigan, 6 in the morning, in that gray hour before the sun decides whether it's actually going to show up. I'd made the classic mistake of assuming fishing would be relaxing. Ruth was 81. She had on a windbreaker that had clearly survived several decades and at least one house fire. There was a scorch mark down one sleeve she never once explained. She worked a tangle out of her line with the kind of patience you only earn by having genuinely nowhere else to be. I said something dumb, the way you do to fill silence with a stranger. I asked if she came here often. Every morning the water isn't frozen, she said, not looking up. So I asked if she ever got bored of it. She looked at me the way you'd look at someone who'd just asked if she got bored of breathing. Son, she said, I spent 41 years worrying what the women at church thought of my kitchen. You want to know what boredom actually is? Boredom is caring what people think of your kitchen. Then she reeled in a bass roughly the size of a shoe and didn't seem particularly impressed with herself about it. That sentence followed me home. 41 years spent managing the reputation of a kitchen almost nobody ever really looked at. And here's the detail that makes it sting. Ruth wasn't poor. She'd raised 3 kids on a school teacher's salary and a farmer's income, and by the time I met her, she had more sitting quietly in index funds than most of the people who used to eye her linoleum. She'd simply stopped needing anyone to know that. What Ruth had figured out, what almost everyone financially secure seems to figure out eventually, usually about 30 years later than they wish they had, is that most of what we call financial pressure isn't really about money at all. It's about an audience. It's a performance we've been quietly funding with our paycheck for people who are far too consumed performing their own show to be watching ours. So here are 6 financial habits that drain smart, capable people for years without them ever noticing. Why our brains fall for every one of them so easily, and, more importantly, exactly what to do instead. Not at 65. This week. 1. Spending to match the people around you. There's a term for this worth knowing because once you know it, you'll start spotting it everywhere. Social comparison bias. Our brains weren't built to judge success in absolute terms. They were built to judge it against whoever happens to be standing closest to us. For most of human history, that was a tribe of maybe 40 people. Now, thanks to the phone in your pocket, your tribe is several thousand people wide. And nearly all of them are broadcasting a highlight reel, never a bank statement. Here's Graham, a claims adjuster, the kind of steady, sensible guy who balances his checkbook out of habit. His neighbor put in a saltwater pool. Graham didn't especially want one. By his own admission, he doesn't even like swimming much. But something about driving past it every evening, watching the light hit the water, needled at him in a way he couldn't quite name. So he financed one anyway. 18 months later, he was still paying off a pool he used 4 times a summer at an interest rate that nearly doubled its real cost by the time the loan closed. The expensive part was never the pool itself. It was what he gave up without noticing. Economists call it the substitution effect, and it simply means this. Every dollar spent matching someone else's visible choice is a dollar that can no longer serve your own invisible ones. Retirement, breathing room, the freedom someday to walk away from a job you've stopped loving. Comparison is a mirror pretending to be a window. You think you're looking outward, but you're really just watching yourself get smaller. The fix is almost insultingly simple. Before any purchase above a threshold you choose, $500 is a fair line. Ask one honest question. Would I still want this if no one would ever see it? Not, do I want it? Would you want it with no witnesses? That single question quietly kills off a third of the impulse purchases most people make in a year. 2. Letting your possessions become a second job. There's a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with work. It comes from ownership. Diane, a retired dental hygienist, told her financial advisor something he still repeats years later. She hadn't realized how much of her mental bandwidth went toward maintaining the evidence of a successful life until she started giving pieces of it away. The good silverware, polished before anyone was ever allowed to see it. The car she kept spotless for a driveway no one was photographing. And then the detail that stops people cold, the storage unit. 6 years, $140 a month. Guarding furniture from a house she hadn't lived in since 2018. Do that math slowly. Over $10,000 spent protecting furniture she, by her own admission, didn't fully recognize when she finally opened the door. Behavioral economists call this the endowment effect. We irrationally overvalue things for the sole reason that we own them. That couch isn't worth what you paid for it. It's worth what a stranger would hand you for it today, which is almost always far less, and every month you insure it, store it, or simply tiptoe around it. You're paying rent on an old memory dressed up as an asset. Ownership was supposed to be the reward. For a lot of people, it quietly becomes the chore. Once a year, walk through your own home and ask honestly, of anything expensive enough to matter, is this earning its keep, or have I quietly become its employee? If you're spending money, time, or worry just to keep something in existence, that's not wealth sitting in your garage. That's a subscription you forgot you were paying. A word before we keep going. If this kind of thing is useful to you, actually pulling apart the financial habits, nobody sits you down and explains, I put one of these out every week so it's worth staying for. All right, back to it. 3. Performing competence at work. Cole spent 19 years in logistics, and one story sums up an entire era of his career. A coworker used to send emails at 11:40 at night, not because the work was urgent, but because the timestamp did something the content never could. It whispered, without saying a word, "Look how devoted I am." Organizational psychologists have a term for it. Presenteeism as signaling, visible effort standing in for actual results, because effort is easy to display and outcomes are hard to measure in the moment. It's exhausting precisely because it demands 2 full-time jobs at once. Doing the work and narrating the work to an audience of coworkers and bosses who are, statistically, far too busy narrating their own performance to be watching yours closely at all. Here's where it gets expensive. People busy performing competence rarely ask for raises because asking means admitting out loud that the current picture isn't already perfect, and that breaks the performance. Cole didn't ask for one for 6 straight years. He worked it out later, conservatively, that the silence cost him somewhere near $40,000 in lost salary. Effort that needs to be witnessed to feel worthwhile was never really about the work. It was about the worry underneath it. The fix isn't stop working hard. It's separating the effort from the theater around it. Keep a private record of what you've actually delivered, not a public one. Ask for what that record is worth. Nobody gets promoted for staying late. They get promoted for results, and results were never the kind of thing that needed an audience to be real. 4. Chasing more. Without a finish line. This is the one that catches people closest to the finish line and quietly convinces them to keep running anyway. Behavioral finance calls it hedonic adaptation, the tendency for any raise, bonus, or windfall to feel completely normal within months, quietly resetting your baseline so the next increase feels just as necessary as the last one did. It's a large part of why lottery winners so rarely end up meaningfully happier a year later. Your income climbs. Your definition of enough climbs right alongside it. The finish line keeps moving at exactly the pace you're running. Warren, a machinist, put it in terms a lot of people recognize the moment they hear it. He kept meaning to drop to part-time once his savings hit a certain number. He hit that number. Then the market looked shaky, so he told himself he'd wait a year. Then a grandchild was born, and he wanted a little more cushion for that. Then it was 2 more years after that. He finally stopped at 71, not because the number ever felt like enough, but because his knees made the decision for him instead. More is never a destination. It's a direction, and directions don't have an arrival. The genuinely useful fix here is one of the few in personal finance that actually works. Write your number down before you're anywhere close to it, somewhere you can't quietly negotiate with yourself later. Say it out loud to a spouse, a friend, an advisor, someone who will hold you to it. Enough, defined in a clear-headed moment, tends to stay enough. Enough, redefined the instant you're about to reach it, almost never does. 5. Saving everything for someday. Elaine kept a set of wedding china in a cabinet for 31 years. Used it twice, once for a 40th anniversary, once for a granddaughter's engagement dinner. When she finally asked herself why, the honest answer was that she'd been waiting for an occasion worthy enough to deserve it, and no ordinary Tuesday ever quite measured up. Here's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath that story. Money and possessions only carry value in the moment you actually use them. A retirement account you never touch isn't wealth so much as a carefully organized inheritance for somebody else, built at the cost of the experiences you could have had along the way and quietly chose not to. This isn't an argument against saving. Saving is what makes the good years possible in the first place. It's an argument against the specific habit of saving past the point of genuine need, purely out of reflex. Waiting for the right occasion is just fear wearing a nicer outfit. Pick one thing this month: a good meal, a short trip, the good dishes on an unremarkable Wednesday. And do it without waiting for an occasion to grant you permission. Small, deliberate spending on what actually matters to you was never the opposite of financial discipline. It's what the discipline was for all along. 6. Checking the portfolio. Like it's a verdict on you. This last one is the big one, because it's quietly sitting underneath most of the others. Cameron, a retired electrician, once described his first year of retirement as the hardest financial year of his life, even though his net worth had barely moved. Why? He was checking his portfolio every single morning with his coffee, and every red day landed like a personal verdict on decisions he'd already made and couldn't take back. This is loss aversion doing precisely what it evolved to do. The sting of a loss registers on average about twice as strongly in us as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. The market doesn't know or care about your nervous system. Checking it daily just means paying that emotional tax over and over for no useful information in return. What actually changed things for Cameron wasn't a better return. It was a cash buffer. A well-established piece of retirement planning where you keep a year or two of expenses in cash or short-term instruments, specifically so a downturn never forces you to sell investments at the worst possible moment. Once that buffer existed, a rough week in the market stopped being an emergency and became something closer to weather. Something happening around him instead of something happening to him. Peace of mind, it turns out, is the one asset that compounds in every direction at once. You don't need to be retired for this to apply. Build even a small buffer against whatever decision makes you most anxious, and check the number that actually matters, your progress against your own plan. far less often than the one that doesn't, which is the market's mood on any given Tuesday afternoon. Back to the lake. I still think about Ruth's kitchen more than I probably should. 41 years spent on a performance for an audience that was, statistically, almost entirely occupied worrying about their own kitchens instead. The 6 things we've walked through, the spending that matches the neighbors, the possessions that quietly become unpaid jobs, the competence performed for coworkers, the chasing with no finish line, the china that never leaves the cabinet, the portfolio checked like a mirror every morning, were never really 6 separate problems. They're one problem, wearing 6 different outfits. Each one is a version of financing a show for a room that's already empty. You don't need to be 81 with a fishing rod in your hand to see that clearly. You can use the good dishes tonight. You can ask the honest question about the pool, the promotion, the storage unit, the number you swore would finally be enough. The audience was never really sitting there. It almost never is. The only review that was ever going to count was the one you eventually give yourself looking back, and that review has never once cared what was parked in the driveway. It only asks whether you actually lived inside the life you spent so long so carefully performing.